for the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know what your name is, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay, so should I start now then? Yeah. All right. So I'm Dr. Roy Casagranda. I'm a professor of political science. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Dr. Roy Casagranda. So if you're interested in my material, you can go there and see the full lectures. I've been resisting TikTok, but I finally started doing that as well. So there's now some material going on to TikTok, and I know there's a bunch of material that's out there already. So.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely got familiar with you through social media. It's a lot of clips. You're sharing a lot of information, and I really appreciate that. Now I can ask you, when did you develop this passion for history? Were you always into it, or did you kind of get into it later in life?
Oh no, I got into it as a kid. I know for sure by the time I was about 11, I was already starting to get into history. There was something really fascinating to me about trying to figure out how we got to this moment. Because as a kid, I started to think, it's really weird. I traveled a lot, and it struck me as so weird that there were so many different cultures and so many different ways of living, and everybody thought they had it right. And like at some level, I was like, well, everybody can't be right if they're doing different things. And so it made me fascinated with how did we get the borders we got, and why are some places filled with artifacts and ruins and monuments, and other places not as many. And then what happened was, as I started to get older and I started to do my own research, because I always was ahead of school, so school was always really boring to me. I started to find out that so much of what we were being taught was wrong. And by the time I was probably about 19, I realized that it was just all a series of lies. And when I discovered that, my passion like quadrupled. Now I really wanted to know more, and I started reading even more material, and it just shocked me the extent to which what we were taught was wrong, to the point where I felt like I had to relearn history. And in my 20s, 30s, 40s, like I was constantly going, "Oh wow, that's another error that I was taught." I couldn't believe how many things were just off. So.
Okay. Now I can ask you this. I guess in the last couple of years, it's been a vast change in technology. You got AI, Chat GBT, you got social media, and people may say it's the age of information, but a lot of times, sometimes some of the information, it can be misleading or incorrect. By you being a professor and a scholar, do you feel like are things getting better in terms of people learning, the real history, or has it gotten a little bit more difficult and harder?
I think it's gotten worse, there's two reasons for that. One, I'm really nervous about AI, but maybe not for all the reasons. I mean, I am worried about Skynet. Like, I will not lie. I think the fact that every single sci-fi thing ever produced tells us we're going to all die because of this. Sci-fi is important because it's always trying to critique the world we're in right now. So it's the take of people who are looking at the world in a different perspective than the mainstream. So it's a critique. And the fact that it's always asking this question and answering it in the same basic way tells us we should be nervous. But that's not the only reason. I have yet to ask AI a factual question and get a correct answer. I am shocked at how often it is wrong. And my wife has actually asked, she's paying for an AI platform, and she asked that paying platform, should I use you for factual information? And it said no. It said, you are using me incorrectly if you are. It said I'm unreliable. Like, it admitted it, and it basically hallucinates and makes stuff up. I think it's more intrigued with the getting you an answer than it is getting you the right answer. Like, it wants to please you, and that's not what I want from from my information source. I just want you to tell me what the facts are. So I'm nervous about that because I'm worried people are going to rely on AI to give them data, and you're not going to get reliable data. The other thing that I've seen over the years is people end up going down rabbit holes, and the rabbit holes, there's an algorithm that's trying to increase your consumption of social media. It doesn't care what social media, it just cares that you do. So it reinforces the rabbit hole because the algorithm has discovered that if you start going down the rabbit hole, you'll consume more. And it doesn't care if you're a leftist or a right winger. It doesn't care if you're a fundamentalist or an atheist, right? All it cares about is feeding the social media system. And so the consequences are really severe because you'll end up with people going extreme far right, for example, or extreme far left, or whatever it is, and they'll fall into conspiracy theories. And so the tragedy of the internet is, I think everybody thought 30 years ago the internet was going to have this democratizing force and information was going to become quickly available. And as a result, as a species, we would become more intelligent. And capitalism came in there and corrupted everything. And I fear we're going in this other direction where we're literally becoming dumber in the information age. And I can't believe that this is how it's turned out because, I think there was so much hope 30 years, even 20 years ago. I don't think the cynicism started to kick in until maybe 20 years ago. And then we started to realize, oh, this is a mistake. This may not end up being the information age. This may end up being the stupid age.
Yeah, definitely. It could be a handicap to a lot of people. Now I can ask you, you have so many different videos and lectures on a wide variety of different points in history. Do you have a favorite subject in particular or, time period?
I don't know that I have a favorite one. What happens is I'll get interested in a period and I'll spend a lot of time on it and then I'll move on. Like I've always loved Aztec history. That's always really intrigued me. But by the same token, I love Middle Eastern history. I guess I really like the Eastern Mediterranean. So take Italy and then just go east until you get to Iran. That zone I've always been really fascinated with. But at some point down the road, I'll dive into Japanese history. Like I don't really have any boundaries. I think everybody's interesting. I've actually been really wanting to get into some West African history and work on like Mansa Musa and the Ghana and Songhai, and that's actually a project I've been starting to dabble in slowly, and it'll probably take me a few years to develop.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Now I can ask you this. You have a book. If you could speak about, what the book is about and where can the viewers, check it out.
All right. So I did write a novel. It is The Blood Throne Icaria. My goal actually is to publish more novels. I actually have 5 in the works, which shows how ADD I am. Instead of writing a book, publishing it, I wrote a book and then went on to the next book. But at some point, I will start to publish those as well. My belief is that if the world doesn't need another history text, what the world needs is something that people will relate to. And so I might be wrong about this, but so instead of just rehashing another account for how Julius Caesar did X or whatever, I've decided I want to write historical fiction and try to bring those narratives to life. The Blood Throne Icaria is about Artemisia I. She was an admiral. She was a satrap. Satrap was a Persian governor. She was a queen. She wore a lot of hats, but she lived in what is today the southwesternmost corner of Turkey, and she was ethnically 3/4 Greek, and the Greeks didn't allow women to rule, and she was ruling on her own as a queen and an admiral and a satrap, and so she sort of broke the mold. And I found her story really compelling. You can buy it on Amazon. I used to sell it on my website, but I've moved recently, and it's too hard to ship things. So.
Okay. I definitely understand it. That's very interesting. I could ask you this. Now what about like maybe like film or like a TV series? Have you thought about like getting into a script or anything like that?
um, so it just so happens I am working on a movie and 2 TV scripts. So you read the tea leaves and figured out the direction I'm going in. The projects are probably too early to go into. Like I probably can't talk in detail about them, but they are historical. The movie is definitely a Hollywood movie, so it will be a little fiction, right? Because Hollywood has a formula, and if you don't fit the formula, you don't get into Hollywood. So there's no way to probably tell a totally accurate story with a Hollywood movie. The TV shows, both of them are really going to try and be as historically accurate as possible. But you still have to. If we're talking about something that happened even 1,000 years ago, even less, there's no way not to put some fiction into it, because you have a fact here and another fact here, and there's nothing in between. There's no way to tie them together. So the only way to make it work is to go ahead and make up the link. And that's always a little bit of a leap of faith, but hopefully we'll be close to the story in the 2 TV series.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely has to be cinematic. People have to be entertained because a lot of times,
Absolutely.
the historical movies they get a lot of flack, like, "Oh, that's not true," or "That didn't happen," and it's like it's a movie.
Yeah. I mean, but sometimes it's too far. Like Braveheart was a fantastic movie. Right? Who didn't love Braveheart? But it was accurate. Like not at all. It was almost completely fiction. The movie Kingdom of Heaven was a good movie. It took some liberties, but it was closer to the truth. So there's like a continuum of how far you can go towards fiction and how far away you don't want to go towards fiction. And my thinking is the closer we can get to the truth, even if it's a Hollywood movie, the better off the world is, because then the audience's worldview is being shaped in a more accurate way. So as much as I love Braveheart as a movie, I don't like it necessarily as much because it is so historically inaccurate. I love submarine movies. I've always been obsessed with them. So when U-571 came out, I couldn't wait to see it. And my wife and I watched it. It's based on a real story, but in the film, they made it an American submarine that captures the German submarine. And in reality, it was a British submarine that captured the German submarine. And I'm like, why did you change that detail? You were worried that the audience wasn't going to be able to relate to the Brits? I mean, the Brits and the how? Because, there was 2 movies that came out about the Dalai Lama about the same time back in the 90s. And one was Kundun, and the other one was 7 Years in Tibet. And everybody watched 7 Years in Tibet because it's told through the eyes of a white guy. By the way, a German who happened to be in Tibet at the time. Kundun has no white characters in it, and hardly anybody saw it. So I get why you want to go ahead and stick the white guy into it, right? Last Samurai, you had to have the white. Tom Cruise has to be in the movie so that people will watch the Japanese actors. And you think, okay, fine, whatever. But in the case of a British submarine and an American submarine, like, really? That's what it takes? It's absurd. And at the end of the movie, it goes, this movie is a fictional movie because it was actually a British crew. And you're like, so you're admitting that you did this. Why? It's bizarre to me.
Yeah. Okay, now I wanted to ask you a little bit about some history. If you could speak about what is the Arab Empire, and sometimes people may refer to it as the Muslim Empire, and if you can distinguish the difference.
Okay, so the Islamic Empire is a common term for it. And the reason people use it is because when the Arabs made their empire, they weren't nationalistic. They weren't doing it for Arabs. They were doing it for Islam. the reason why I like to use the term Arab Empire is because the Arabs made it, the Arabs ruled it. They never called themselves Islamic Empire. That's a term we stuck on them. Arab Empire is a term I'm sticking on them. But for the same reason, there's the Persian Empire, or the Roman Empire, or the British Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the Japanese Empire. It's because that's what happens. A group of people, a nation, makes an empire, and then that empire gets named after them. In the case of the Arab Empire, I've always thought it was really weird when people do Islamic Empire, because we don't do that with the British Empire. Nobody runs around calling it the Christian Empire, or the Russian Empire, the Christian Empire, or the German Empire, the Christian Empire. And, and then I'll hear people say, but the Arab Empire was multi-ethnic. All empires are multi-ethnic. And at the end of the day, they end up where the conquerors are a minority, right? The British Empire, there were way more Indians in the British Empire than there were English people in the British Empire. So there was nothing strange about the Arab Empire having a tiny Muslim population. That's what empires do. And so I've often wondered if the real reason we don't say Arab Empire is because of anti-Arab hate and anti-Arab bigotry. And so to me, this is just an attempt to push back. The Ottoman Empire, we don't call it the Muslim Empire. We don't, you know what I mean? We don't call the Persian Empire the Zoroastrian Empire. So I don't understand why the Arab Empire is getting this special treatment, especially because I'm not sure it's special in a good way.
Okay. I appreciate you breaking that down. Now, I can ask you, now, what time period is this, and how vast was this empire?
So the Arab Empire started forming in the year 633. Just to give you a sense of how strange the moment was, so the Prophet Muhammad dies in 632, and he's replaced by a man named Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr was an older man. He was wise. He was considered by everybody to just be, a devout Muslim and a good person. And wise, right? I said wise already, but I want to say it again because I just want to enforce that he was thought of by the community as being this bastion of wisdom. He does something amazing that had never been done before. He launches armies, I want to say it was 8, in 8 different directions. And his goal is to conquer the Arabian Peninsula. So what is today Saudi Arabia and the GCC. So Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Yemen, the whole thing. Yemen isn't part of the GCC, but throw in Yemen too. And he does it within a year. So in 632, he launches the 8 armies. And within, I want to say 10 months, in 633, he's conquered the Arabian Peninsula. Nobody had ever done that in human history. One of his armies, it was in the east. It had basically gone through the middle of what is today Saudi Arabia, was led by a general named Khalid ibn al-Walid. And Abu Bakr sent him a letter. And in the letter, he said, keep going. Well, keep going. He'd actually finished conquering Arabia. So keep going meant enter the Persian Empire. And so Khalid takes his armies in 633 into the Persian Empire and begins conquering the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire at that point was on its 4th iteration. There had been 4 different versions of it. The second one, by the way, was ruled by Greeks. So the first one and the third and the fourth were ruled by Persians. It had been around, if you put all 4 of those together, it had been around for 1,200 years. Khalid fights the Persians until January, so not even a full year. He conquers the entirety of Western Iraq. He's then sent into Syria in 634, and by 633, he's conquered Syria and Palestine out of the Roman Empire. And by 711, so Khalid's long since passed away by that point, so it's subsequent armies later, the Arab Empire owned everything from Spain to Pakistan, including a big chunk of Central Asia. So it took them about 78 years to make this massive empire that included the entirety of the Persian Empire, plus about 2/3 of the Roman Empire, the land the Roman Empire owned at that time, because the Roman Empire had shrunk considerably by that point. And that empire was at that moment the largest empire that had ever happened. There have been larger empires since that date, but there was nothing bigger before then. And then it didn't last very long. It's hard to pinpoint the moment when it stopped existing, because it dies quickly, but it breaks up. In 756, the first peace breaks off at Spain. Shortly afterwards, Morocco breaks off. And then in 890, northern Iraq, northern Syria break off. And then in 934, a big chunk of what is today Iran breaks off. So by 934, it had lost a huge portion of the empire. I think it's safe to say by 950, it didn't exist anymore. So it lasted, as a powerful entity, it probably lasted about 200 years. And then there was 100 years of just completely disintegrating where it was no longer a powerful entity.
Okay. Now I can ask you about this. You had made a video speaking about the differences in the ethnicity of some of the countries within that empire, like maybe say from Morocco to Egypt to Sudan to Saudi Arabia.
One of the interesting things about Arabs is Arabs aren't, there's no one color. One of the things I think when we think of a nation, right, like if I say Germans, you just white people, right? You're not going to go, oh no, but there's variation. Or if I say Ghana, you're going to think of black people. If I say Mexico has some variation, but certainly you're gonna stereotype and go for a brown population. In the case of Arabs, there's extreme diversity when it comes to skin color. So Sudan, for example, they're Arab, but their skin is very black. They're very dark. In Syria, they're Arab, but their skin is very white. They look like they could be Europeans. And there's everything in between. So Egypt, for example, is a very brown country. It has a large black population as well. In fact, Egypt has had 2 half-black presidents. Its first ever president, Mohammed Najib, he didn't last very long, was half-black. And then Egypt's third president, Anwar Sadat, was half-black. One of the problems with the whole world is colorism is kicked in, and that's not going to be a shock for anybody. So there is colorism that takes place in the Arab world. But if you were to run the clock back, say 500 years ago, that wasn't really much of an issue. So the idea that a person was a white-looking Arab or a black-looking Arab definitely 500 years ago at least wasn't as big a deal as it is today, because today, right, we've got this very strange colorism thing where everybody wants to be European, except Europeans who go sunbathe and give themselves skin cancer. Nobody's happy with what they are, it seems. Although now, right, fair and lovely, I can't say for sure, but I would be nervous putting that on my skin. I wouldn't be surprised if that also gives you skin cancer. I mean, it's changing the color of your skin. How can that be okay? The original Arabs lived in what is today Palestine, Syria, Iraq, but they coexisted with populations that weren't Arab. So, for example, there were Arameans, Armenians, Greeks, Romans, Jews, and then if you go all the way down to the Yemen, Oman, at the very southern end, that was the original Arab area. And when I say Jews, I mean the people we ethnically associate as Palestinians that practice Judaism, because they were also Jewish Arabs. So it's complicated, right? Because there's this religious and a national identity at the same time. And that the majority of that population was actually Christian, with a huge pagan population and a very sizable Jewish population. When Islam happened, the Christian population and the pagan population mass converted to Islam at a really fast pace in the Arabian Peninsula. It was much slower in Syria, Palestine, and Iraq. And when the Arabs conquered out their empire, they didn't genocide the populations they conquered. They just simply conquered them and absorbed them into the empire. So if you were to do a DNA test, you would find that Moroccans don't have the same DNA as the Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula, and for that matter, as Egyptians. And that's one of the reasons why you see such huge skin color variation, facial feature variation, straightness of hair, right? Egyptians have curly hair, Sudanese have curly hair, Syrians tend to have straight hair. Like all that variation is because the Arabs are a multi-nation. They're not a single nation. And as a result, there's huge cultural differences, different ways of eating, different ways of dancing, different ways of dressing. And so in a really strange way, the real thing that connects all the Arabs together is a language. So it's not necessarily a tradition. There are Christian Arabs and there are Jewish Arabs, so it's not a religion. There's, you know, difference in skin color and hairstyle and facial features, so it's not DNA. It's really just the language. And in a really amazing way, the language unifies, because if you speak Arabic, you can go to any Arab country and you'll be able to communicate a little bit. And I'm saying a little bit because also everybody has very different dialects. So like if you know Egyptian Arabic, you might be okay in Saudi Arabia and you might be okay talking to Palestinians or Lebanese or Syrians, but you're going to have a lot of trouble in Morocco because the Arabic is so different. And my experience has been that I have trouble understanding Emiratis because the Arabic I know is Egyptian Arabic, and I'm terrible at it. But and so when I'm in Saudi, I'm okay. But when I'm in UAE, I'm like, I don't know what they're saying. And you would think UAE and Saudi should be really similar, but maybe it's just my lack of Arabic language skill. When I was in Morocco, I had no idea what Moroccans were saying ever. It was hilarious. They knew what I was saying because most of the TV and music is done in Egyptian Arabic. So everybody kind of knows what Egyptian Arabic is. But and then there's Fusha, which is the official language. It's what the Quran is written in. And usually if you take Arabic in the school, I never had any schooling, so I never did this. You learn Fusha, which is completely useless at some level because nobody speaks it. But the news is usually done in Fusha. So like when I listen to news, I'm just lost because I never had any schooling in Fusha, so I never know what they're saying. It's like it's like Latin. Like it's this completely odd, weird thing. And if you try to speak it in the streets, people just laugh at you. So it's hilarious that they teach it. Like, why are you teaching this? You're just setting people up for being laughed at. It'd be like going to Italy after taking Latin and then talking to everybody in Latin. The Italians wouldn't know why you were doing that, and they would laugh at you.
Yeah, that make a lot of sense. I appreciate you breaking that down. Let me say I have one more question about the Arab Empire. Now, what were some of the major contributions, like in terms of math and science? You know, they did a lot of incredible things.
They did. So one of the things that I think was really amazing was when the Arabs conquered Persia, they ended up with an academy that had been set up in the 3rd century by Emperor Shapur. The great source of learning on the planet at the time was the Great Library, which was in Alexandria. It was founded in 290 BC, and in the middle of the 3rd century, so I don't know the year, but somewhere around 250 AD. So what is that? 540 years later, Emperor Shapur decided he didn't like that the Romans had this academy and that the Persians didn't. So he created his own. When the Arabs conquered Persia, they ended up with it. And when the Arabs conquered Egypt, they didn't end up with a great library because in 391, a Christian mob burnt it to the ground. But the Arabs ended up with the version that was in Persia, and that version had Greek works, works from North Africa, works from the Roman Empire, works from China and India. So in other words, it had a lot of material from all around the planet. And the Arabs preserved it, but they didn't do much with it. It was about 100 years later that the Abbasid rulers of the Arab Empire decided that they needed to get into those books, and they brought them to Baghdad, the Abbasid capital, and they began translating those books into Arabic and trying to figure out what they could get out of them. And one of the scholars that was doing this right around the year 800 AD was a guy named Al-Khwarazmi. And he was a Persian scholar who became obsessed with Indian mathematics. So the number system we use in most of the planet, probably 80% of the planet uses, is called Arabic numerals. The other number system that the rest of the planet uses are often called Arabic Hindi numerals or Arabic Indian numerals. The reality is they should all be called Indian numerals. Both sets of number systems were invented by Indians. What happened was this Persian scholar writing in Arabic took those numbers and began using them in a different way. And then his material ended up in Europe. So Europeans didn't know to call them Indian numerals. That's why they're called Arabic numerals. That guy, Al-Khwarazmi, invented algebra. And he wrote the world's first ever algorithm. And when the Romans tried to say his name, Al-Khwarazmi, it came out of their mouth as algorithm. So that's where we get the word algorithm from. He totally transformed mathematics and took it to a new level. Another person from his time period is a guy named Al-Kindi. Al-Kindi spent a lot of time trying to convince people that it was okay to get sources of wisdom from places that weren't your religion. So the fact that the Greeks weren't Muslim, for example, didn't mean that the Muslims should throw the Greeks out. They should still look for the wisdom that the Greeks might have had. And he succeeded, and the result was that it created this period of time that we call the Islamic Golden Age. And in that period, modernity really was taken to a new level. So they discovered, for example, all objects in the universe exert gravity. Light has a finite speed. Light travels as a wave. They are the ones who came up with the scientific method 400 years before Francis Bacon. Ibn al-Haytham stated Newton's first law of motion 500 years before Newton. Ibn al-Haytham was doing calculus 500 years before Newton. He stated Kepler's first law of planetary motion 500 years before Kepler did. So in other words, they were 500 years regularly, consistently ahead of what Europe ended up doing. They invented modern medicine and modern agriculture. They lit up the streets using oil lamps. And by oil, I don't mean like something like olive oil. I mean oil as in the stuff we pump out of the ground and we drive our cars with. They were actually already pumping oil out of the ground and using it to light up streets at night. They had a fast food industry. They had an industry where you would write a list, a person would come to your door, take the list, go to the grocery store, shop, and then bring the groceries to your home. They had a service like that for laundry as well. They pumped fresh water into your home and pumped sewage water out of your home. Like they had become an incredibly modern civilization. And this is despite the fact that there was, the empire was literally collapsing around their ears and there was constant political struggles and invasions. They still managed to do this. Glasswork in the city of Damascus had become so advanced that glass experts today aren't quite sure that they have the same ability to make the type of glass works that were being made in Damascus 800 years ago. So in other words, they had created a very modern civilization.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that information. We went a few minutes over, but I really, was tapped into what you were saying, and I'm still processing a lot of it. Now I can ask you one more time for the viewers if they do want to check out your book or keep up with what you're doing. What's the best way for them to do that? Website, social media, YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube's probably the best way. I am dropping short videos on TikTok right now, but I'm terrible at social media. I've never really liked it very much, so I resist. I am going to start doing Instagram here shortly, so hopefully that'll improve a little bit. And usually I use Facebook to be sarcastic and kind of a jerk. So if you want to see the dark side of me, Facebook is where I go to be mean. But otherwise, I try to be nice. I try to be a nice person.
Okay. Well, it's been an honor to speak with you. So I'll edit it up and maybe I'll have it ready by next week and then I can send you the link.
All right. Thanks so much, Taye.
All right. Thank you again. Take care and be safe out there.
All right, take care.
All right. See you.